Hello and welcome to the urinary system. So let's go through and talk about the kidneys and sort of how they work and how they do what they do. Now, the first thing I want to say is read this. It's fascinating, not test material. The first thing I really want to say is that the kidneys do far more than you think. All right? When you think about the kidneys, you probably think about urine formation. That's great. That is part of this. But I'm here to tell you that whereas the respiratory system sort of helps you get oxygen and relieve your system of carbon dioxide and not a whole lot else, the urinary system, the kidneys in particular, do so much. Okay, they do so much. There's so much happening here behind the scenes that you're not consciously aware of. It's just wild to me. So let's go through and talk about a little bit about what they do and then go through the details on how it all works. All right. The kidneys are the body's main, what's called excretory organ. Not defecation, excretory. And what the kidneys do is they filter your blood plasma. Okay, blood plasma comes in, the kidneys filter this, and then kick out anything they don't need. The essence of this is that the kidneys are responsible for, and this is the main thing, the elimination of nitrogenous waste products. In essence, the kidneys take in all the plasma from the blood, cleanse it, return everything else to the bloodstream, keeping behind things that the body wants to get rid of. Main goal of kidney. Now, there's way more going on here. Because the kidneys deal with the amount of fluid in the body, this means they also regulate blood volume and thus blood pressure. This means that the kidneys regulate general osmolarity of the body. That would be the amount of salt in the blood versus the amount of salt in body tissues. The kidneys have a secretory function. They release a hormone called renin, which hormonally regulates blood pressure secondarily. The kidneys release another hormone called erythropoietin. The idea is that when your kidneys sense a low oxygen environment, they secrete erythropoietin, and the erythropoietin goes to your bone marrow and stimulates your bone marrow to produce red blood cells to increase the amount of oxygen carrying capacity of your body. I mean, the kidneys basically regulate the amount of red blood cells in your body. That's amazing. It's amazing. The kidneys, working with the respiratory system, regulate the acid balance of the body. The idea is that the kidneys are capable of taking in what we call free hydrogens and then excreting those as urine. Basically, what this means is that the urine will have an acidity level to it. Most always, the urine will be acidic because some of the acid components of the body will be filtered out by the kidneys and relieved from your system via the urine. That's why urine tends to be completely sterile, because most organisms cannot survive in the acidic environment of urine. And what else do we have here? Final steps in synthesizing hormones leading to vitamin D. That's a fact. So your capacity for the absorption of calcium from your intestines, which is the function of vitamin D, partially hinges on the function of the kidneys. Again, they got their hot little hands everywhere. And then last but not least, the kidneys are responsible for a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. That would be the making of new glucose from amino acids as building blocks. When you are extraordinarily hungry, well, that's not a correct way to phrase this. When you haven't had food for a prolonged period of time, or alternatively, when you have not been taking in actual sugars for a prolonged period of time, your body must make sugars to feed your brain, and that process is completed in the kidneys through a process called gluconeogenesis. It's a wild thing, man. There's a lot of neat stuff going on here. Now, the urinary system has a variety of parts and pieces here. There are a pair of kidneys that do the majority of the work. They're the star of the show. These will then lead into a pair of ureters. The ureters will carry urine down to the bladder, and then the exit from the bladder goes out of the body via a structure called the urethra. Right, so you got kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. That is the urinary system. Now, what the heck are nitrogenous wastes? Before we go any further, We said that the main function of the kidney is to rid the body of nitrogenous waste products. So what the heck are these and where do they come from? Well, what they are derivatives of ammonia, in essence. Ammonia is very toxic to the body, so the body has to kind of play some games with this. Maybe some urea is created, uric acids are created, that are all variants of ammonia-based products. Basically, your cellular metabolism results in the production of toxic chemicals. Okay? General metabolism, general activity of muscle flexion, neural activity, all of it. The waste products tend to be nitrogenous wastes. So your body will get rid of those nitrogenous waste products from the kidneys. The kidneys will collect these and get rid of them. Now, urine itself, this is kind of fascinating. Urine itself is typically sterile, but you will notice that bathrooms have a kind of unique stink to them. That is because if urine gets on the floor, then bacteria will break that uric acid down, these complex molecules. They will break that down, and they will release what do you call it, aerosol ammonia that you can smell. That's why bathrooms have that stink to them typically. And let's see, what else do we want to say here? Creatinine. So this is a breakdown product from muscle flexion. Yeah, that's good enough. I will point out one more little nuance to this, but we'll talk about this more later. The kidneys are also responsible for taking in certain medicines that we utilize and other drugs from the bloodstream that's taken in as in the kidneys, and then the kidneys get rid of that. So that's one of the reasons we do drug tests on urine, is because the kidneys are specialized to pull certain compounds out of the bloodstream and get them out of the body via the urine. Certain drugs amongst those. Alright, so here's the urinary system. And bear with me, folks, I've kind of tweaked a slide here or there, so, it may seem a little different, but I assure you it's virtually the same. Alright, here is the urinary system. A pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, a bladder, and a urethra, okay? Now, it's quite different at the bottom end between male and female. And the main difference here being that in a female's system, the urethra is very, very short, so the bladder is sitting more or less right up against the body wall, and the exit through the urethra is only about 4 centimeters, so about yay long. Whereas in a male, this can be up to about 20 centimeters in length. Now what that will do is, the risk of urinary tract infections is vastly higher in females, because bacteria have to travel a shorter distance to get into the bladder and thus infect other areas. Whereas in males, there's a much longer distance to travel. And as this is happening, if the person is frequently urinating, the urine being acidic will destroy those bacteria. So the length of the urethra is important. Also worthy of mention here are prostate issues. Males have a prostate gland which goes around the urethra, and as you age, the prostate tends to enlarge, and as the prostate enlarges, this will put pressure against the urethra and decrease the capacity for urination. So the cliche is like an old man standing at a toilet for, 5 or 10 minutes trying to empty the bladder, because the prostate will swell up and prevent the urethra from flowing the way that it's supposed to flow. Yeah. Now, I will point out one more concept. I've got written down here 2 sphincters, internal and external. I'll be talking about this more later, but the idea is that a sphincter is a muscle that closes off a tube. Okay, you can almost think of your lips as a sphincter or your eyes as a sphincter. They close things. Okay, they're circular muscle. But in this case, this is smooth muscle and skeletal muscle. We'll talk about it later. But there is a internal urethral sphincter that's attached at the bladder, and an external urethral sphincter that's attached at the outside of the body. These 2 sphincters work together to regulate when you urinate. And bear with me, more on that later. Alright, the kidneys are located retroperitoneally. Now, this is a weird statement. When you think about your abdominal organs, like your intestines, for instance, your liver, they are inside the cavity of your abdomen, your abdominal cavity. The kidneys are not. The kidneys are behind that cavity. They're encapsulated in the body wall. They're surrounded in fat and held in place by ligaments. All right, they've got this big fat capsule. They have a fibrous capsule. There's all this connective tissue. They're held in the back, almost the size of your fists, with the right one being a little lower than the left one. The right one is lower because your liver is there and big and hard, and it pushes down against the kidney. Yeah, it's perfect. Protected by the lower rib cage. protected by fat. The reason the kidneys are completely enveloped in fat is because the fat acts like a cushion. Works great. In most cases, I will, just for interest, point out this. Boy, do I wish I had that old bike right there. I would love something like that. But if you look at the guy riding this old motorcycle, you'll see that there's no suspension on this bike, so every bump you hit, you feel. And if you ride this for a prolonged period of time, it's not unlikely that when you would get off of this motorcycle with no suspension, you go to the bathroom, there's blood in your urine because the kidneys have been rattled around so much. They sag down. They're pulled down by gravity every time you hit a bump. So if you look at this guy, he's wearing a kidney belt is what this is called. It's not a corset. He's wearing a kidney belt to help support his kidneys so he doesn't have kidney issues as a result of riding this motorcycle. You gotta love the 20s and 30s. Kidney belts, but no helmets. Alright. Here is a real kidney on the left and an artistic rendering on the right. Now, what I want to point out is first the three main regions of the kidney here. We've got the renal cortex. Cortex is always around the outside, seen here in a light color. Renal medulla. The medulla is seen here. You see all these pointy things? Pointy. This is the renal medulla. Okay, the medulla contains these structures that we call the renal pyramids. Can you see the pyramid shape? Those are pyramids, that's the renal medulla. And then a structure called the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is where everything is collected before being shuffled out via the ureter. Now, I expect you to know the route, if you will, the route that urine takes through the kidney. And I'm going to go ahead and lay this on you now, and I'll be laying it on you again as time progresses. It's over and over and over again because this is important. I foresee on your exam you having to know the route of urine through the kidney. This is important. So how does it go? Well, blood comes into the renal cortex. You'll see a number 1 here. That's where it all starts. Blood comes into the cortex. That is then filtered. That filtrate is dumped into the renal pyramids, which are here. Okay, so we're going from the medulla to the, from the cortex to the pyramids and the medulla. From the pyramids, this travels into this little point here to a minor calyx. 3 minor calyx. 2 minor calyces coming together form a major calyx. All right, a major calyx, 5. That travels into the renal pelvis, there, okay, renal pelvis. And then that travels down the ureter, here. And then from the ureter, you go to the bladder. From the bladder to the urethra. And from the urethra, hopefully, to a toilet somewhere, okay? So, again, from the cortex to the pyramid. From the pyramid to a minor calyx to major calyx to pelvis. And from the pelvis to the ureter, ureter to bladder, bladder to urethra, urethra to toilet. That's the idea here. Now, the kidneys get a massive fraction of blood flow, so your kidneys only account for about 0.4% of body weight, but they receive 21% of cardiac output. This is commonly referred to as the renal fraction, because the blood must be cleansed of waste products constantly. The kidneys have to get just a massive quantity of blood flow, not because they need the oxygen, but because they have to filter that blood and keep the waste out. If waste build up, that's a major problem. Perfect. Now, the main filtrative apparatus of the kidney is called a nephron. That's the structure. So what is the functional unit of the kidney? That functional unit is a nephron. Let's talk about where they are and how they work. So what you see here is part of the cortex and part of a renal pyramid, the medulla. Okay. Now, the nephrons are indeed the functional units. Let's see what I want to say here. You've got lots of nephrons, about 1 million per kidney, so there are piles and piles and piles of these. And what they do is a 3-part process. The concept of how the kidneys filter your blood. Okay. And what we're really talking about here is how the nephrons filter your blood, because the nephron's the functional unit. The way this works is broken down into 3 parts. These 3 parts are filtration, reabsorption, and excretion. Okay? Filtration of the blood. Blood comes in, you filter out everything that's ever going to become urine. It all comes into the kidney. What's called tubular reabsorption, where you dump everything you want to keep in the blood back into the blood. And then excretion, tubular excretion, which is where you dump anything you want to get rid of real bad back into the bloodstream. So the whole blood plasma basically comes into the nephron. The nephron dumps back into the blood everything that it needs to stay in the bloodstream. You got to put the water back, for instance, and the nutrients back. And then there's some other stuff in the bloodstream that the body has to get rid of. So the kidney will actively, the nephron will actively pump that stuff back into the urine stream. That is the excretion apparatus here. So let's look at this nephron. The nephron has a variety of parts. Let me just check something real quick. Yeah, okay. The nephron has a variety of parts, the first of which that we're going to talk about on this slide is the glomerulus. Okay, the glomerulus is the main filtrative apparatus. Okay, if the nephron is the main tool of the kidney, the glomerulus is the main part of the nephron. And what the glomerulus does is it's got a big old afferent arteriole. This is part of the arterial network of the body. This big honking afferent arteriole comes in. It's got these what are called fenestrated capillary networks inside of here. Fenestrated means they got holes in them, basically. These are leaky capillaries. Blood gets pumped in, and boy, does a lot of fluid leak out. All right, they got little holes in them. It's like having a hose to water your garden and drilling holes all through it. Like fluid just leaks right out of there. Okay, and then you have this efferent arteriole where the blood comes back out, and it's very small in diameter. Big tube coming in, small tube coming out. That means the pressure in here is super high. Super high. And that's good because you want to leak out a bunch of fluid here. We're trying to leak all kinds of blood plasma out into this, what is called Bowman's capsule. Do I have that on here anywhere? Regardless, that's what that is. This is called Bowman's capsule. You want to leak out all this fluid into there, and that fluid has to begin traveling through the tubule networks of the kidney. All right? Yeah. Good. Okay, so the glomerular filtration rate is 125 milliliters per minute. That's 180 liters a day, I think is what I'm getting at here. We only have about 5 liters of blood in our body, so what that really means is that we filter our blood about 56 times a day through the kidneys. That's crazy. That's really crazy. So the idea is that of the amount of fluid coming into the kidneys and being processed by them, very little is actually turned into urine. Imagine, you know, we can't vent 180 liters because we only have 5 liters of blood. If all of this left as urine, you would be dead in minutes. All right, so the kidneys are very, very good at processing out the bad stuff that you want to get rid of and putting everything you want to keep back into the bloodstream. Perfect. Perfect. So the glomerulus makes what's called glomerular filtrate, or just filtrate for short. And what the filtrate is, hang on, I'm sure I'm jumping ahead here, and I don't want to keep doing that to you guys, so I'm just going to stick to the script. This is a nice image of the kidneys having all of... so what happened here is they have injected the arterial network with a red elastomeric dye. Basically, this turns into rubber when it hardens. And then they went in and removed all of the actual tissue, leaving behind nothing but the arterial network. So what you see here is a bunch of nephrons. Look at this, the shade in the background, right? Can you see all the stuff sticking up? Those are all nephrons, all right? All nephrons, all nephrons. So there's, you know, millions of these. There's millions of them inside your body. Okay, now then, 4 regions of the renal tubules. Yeah, we should probably talk about that. All right, so the nephron itself is from here over, all right? The nephron is the glomerulus, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. Glomerulus, proximal tubule, loop of Henle, distal tubule. That is what this is. I think I've got it lined out here nice and pretty. You've got the glomerulus to the kidney tubules and nephron. That'd be the proximal tubule, loop of Henle, distal tubule. That will travel down in the renal pyramid through a collecting duct. The collecting ducts are in the renal pyramids. That goes to that minor calyx to major calyx to renal pelvis to ureter, ureter to bladder, bladder to urethra. Glomerulus to the proximal tubule, down the loop of Henle, to the distal tubule, down a collecting duct, which is in the pyramids, okay? Do I have another slide? Yeah. In the pyramids. Okay, there's a renal pyramid. That is the collecting duct, going down the renal pyramid. From there, we go to the, what do you call them? Minor calyces. Minor calyces come in together to form a major calyx. Major calyces come together to form the renal pelvis. Renal pelvis leads to a ureter, which goes down to the bladder. Bladder has an exit via the urethra. Let's do that one more time. Blood is pumped into the cortex of that kidney, man. And in that cortex, what it's really being pumped into is this glomerulus. From the glomerulus, fluid, blood plasma, travels through the proximal convoluted tubule, down the loop of Henle, to the distal convoluted tubule, into a collecting duct. The collecting... Right, minor technical difficulties. Let's get back to it. Blood gets pumped into this glomerulus. All the blood plasma basically is extracted, and that passes through this tubule network. It is processed. Everything the body wants to keep is removed. Everything the body wants rid of is put in. And in essence, by the time you go through the proximal convoluted tubule, down the nephron loop or the loop of Henle, and into the distal convoluted tubule, by this point, urine is urine. Everything that's gonna be there is there. The only thing that the collecting duct does is dehydrate that fluid. So, let's make sure we're together. Blood gets pumped into the glomerulus. It goes through the proximal convoluted tubule, down the loop of Henle, into the distal convoluted tubule. Then it goes into the collecting ducts. The collecting duct, being a part of the renal pyramids, they dump into the minor calyxes. Minor calyxes go to the major calyxes. Major calyxes go into the renal pelvis. That then becomes the ureter, which travels down to the bladder, and then the bladder empties urine via the urethra. Everything that will ever be urine is there by this stage. It's over. Okay? Only thing the collecting duct does in those renal pyramids is extract fluid, concentrating that urine down. Alright. Now, the whole process of urine formation is referred to in 3 steps. Glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. So let's go through and look at those in detail. Glomerular filtration. This is diffusion based. Basically all the water, and bear with me, I've got a few slides on this. All the water and salts and nutrients and wastes, all of it, the whole complement of blood plasma gets dumped into that glomerulus. The only stuff that stays behind are the formed elements, because the formed elements are too big. The formed elements are too big to get out of these fenestrated capillaries. The capillaries have holes in them, but the holes are small. So what escapes? Water molecules, waste products, nutrients like glucose. This all enters this, what we call Bowman's capsule here, this glomerulus. Okay? That will then enter the proximal convoluted tubule, where you begin the process of tubular reabsorption. Okay? Tubular reabsorption is both passive and active transport. The idea is that nutrients and salt molecules are actively pulled out of these tubule networks, and water moves in via diffusive or osmotic probabilities, you might say, and the actual waste products are left behind. So in essence, tubular reabsorption is when you take back up everything you want to keep. There's stuff in the blood plasma you want to keep. Sugars, nutrients, you want to keep that. Amino acids, you want to keep those in the blood. So those are reabsorbed via tubular reabsorption. And then the last little bit of this is called tubular secretion. And this is when the body actively transports into what will become the urine materials that the body really wants to get rid of. Certain ions and molecules, things like free hydrogens that are acidic in essence. Certain drugs, like penicillin is a really good example of this. The body's good at clearing penicillin. It does this by tubular secretion, putting this stuff back into what will become the urine. Again, the reason we do drug tests is because of tubular secretion. The body will use the kidneys to dump in certain products that the body wants to get rid of back into what will become the urine so that it can be rid from the body. And this is another slide, just kind of further breaking that down a little bit. This shows what is filtered and what is not filtered. So what comes out in glomerular filtrate? Water, waste, nutrients, and salts. What stays in? The formed elements and plasma proteins. Formed elements, things like blood cells and platelets. That is because these are just too big. They can't escape these fenestrated capillaries, whereas this stuff's much smaller. Tubular reabsorption. 90% of the water gets put back into the bloodstream. You want to keep that stuff. 90% of all the fluid that left as glomerular filtrate is dumped right back into the bloodstream. Immediately, right back in. Most of the water stays. Nutrients are transported back in via active transport. Salts, most salts are pulled out. What's left behind? A little bit of water to keep things fluid. Okay, you want the urine to be fluid. All the nitrogenous wastes that you can keep in there are staying in the urine. And then a little bit of excess salt just to keep things osmotically balanced. And then the last step here is tubular secretion. Tubular secretion is when you get rid of the drugs and the ammonia and the creatinine. This is the body dumping in stuff that you really want to get rid of. Okay? And the things that remain behind, again, things like nitrogenous waste. A little bit of water to keep it fluid. Let's see, what do we want to say here? I'm going to keep this short. One of the important bits that your body does in this nephron loop is actively transport salt into the pyramids. You can see the nephron loop dips down into the renal pyramid. The concept is that it wants to get that renal pyramid, and generally speaking, the medulla of the kidney, to be incredibly salty. The saltier the better. It wants it incredibly salty for a very logical reason. This is what you need to be thinking the whole time I'm talking about this. Water chases solutes. Okay, osmotic balance here. We're playing osmotic balance games. Water chases the solute. And where the solute is, water will follow. So if you can keep the renal pyramids very, very salty, when fluid is traveling down these collecting ducts, that salt is going to draw the fluid out of the collecting duct. Alright? The salt draws fluid out for a very logical reason. You want to keep most of the water that's in your blood plasma. You only want enough water in the urine to make it fluid and flow. Alright? Yeah, this keeps us from becoming dehydrated because our ancestors didn't always have an active source of water. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty happy with that. Still lots of water. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So what does the collecting duct do? The collecting duct concentrates the urine. Okay, that's really all I want to say here. The collecting duct concentrates the urine. If all of the fluid passed as urine through the collecting ducts did not concentrate that urine down, it would be 36 liters a day. In other words, you'd be dead within an hour. So, take-home message here is that the collecting ducts are incredibly good at pulling water out of the urine. So, as the ureters do their job and then dump that filtrate into the collecting duct pulls lots of water out because of the salt gradient. Okay, it's all about osmosis here. That water is leaving via osmosis. It is chasing this incredibly salty medulla. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Let me make darn sure that I've hit the high points here. Everything that's going to be in the urine is in the urine by this stage. Okay? By the time you get here, urine is urine. It's just very dilute. It's got a lot of water in it. So what pulls the water out? The collecting duct does. Okay, the collecting duct is very good at pulling out all the excess water from this urinary filtrate and concentrating that down to become actual urine at that stage. And that is all because of how salty the renal medulla is. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Now, all this is regulated by hormonal means. There are three of these that I will mention. These are aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, which kind of work together with each other. And then in opposition to those is atrial natriuretic hormone. So aldosterone, what this is a salt-retaining hormone. When aldosterone is in your system, your body retains salt, so it lets less salt enter into the urine stream, which means that you have more salt in the body. And if more salt's in the body, water chases the solute. That means that your urine output drops pretty dramatically. All right, if you're keeping the salt and not letting it leave as urine, then your urine output's going to drop. Antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone makes the collecting ducts more permeable to water. In other words, as fluid is running down the collecting duct, if the collecting duct is made more permeable, that means that that water is going to be leaving, going back into the body. So instead of leaving as urine, it's coming back into the body because the collecting duct is very permeable. That drops your urine output. Alright? Drops your urine output. Antidiuretic hormone drops your urine output. And then last but not least is atrial natriuretic hormone. This is secreted by your heart, the atrial myocardium. So this is part of the atria. when blood pressure is high. So if the blood pressure is high, then atria pick that up. They release natriuretic hormone. And what this does is it causes the kidneys to secrete more salt into the urine. So if salt is entering the urine, water chases the solute. That means that your urine output goes up. Okay, this is osmosis. Very simple osmosis. If you're dumping lots of salt into the urine, then water is going to chase that salt and it's going to increase your urinary output. This is done to drop your blood pressure. Okay, if the blood pressure is too high, you want to bring it back down, negative feedback. That is done by natriuretic hormone in no small part. Now, interestingly, and that's the whole point of this slide, really. Interestingly, alcohol is an antidiuretic hormone inhibitor. Alcohol, when you drink, is an antidiuretic hormone inhibitor. And what that means is, when you drink, what you also notice, you probably realize that you go to the bathroom a lot. Right, the reason that you have to urinate constantly when you're drinking alcohol is because antidiuretic hormone isn't working correctly, so your collecting ducts remain less permeable, if you might say. All right, so they can't absorb water as well. So all the urinary filtrate that enters the collecting duct just leaves as urine, or a lot of it does, I should say, more than it's supposed to. So you're constantly going to the bathroom because this system isn't functioning correctly. So if you're drinking, what should you also do? Make sure and drink lots of water so you don't end up dehydrating yourself and ending up with problems. Yeah, this basically just says everything I just said. And then there are transport maxima. So worthy of mention here is, and I've changed the slide up just a little bit, worthy of mention here is diabetes. So we know at this stage that one of the problems with diabetes, one of the issues, one of the ways you know, is by having a really high urine output. So when there's a lot of sugar in the blood, that means that your urine output goes up pretty dramatically. Anything over about 220 milligrams per deciliter is the number we tend to call. This is because nutrients like sugars are taken back into the bloodstream via active transport. So we have these transport proteins that will grab the glucose molecules out of the kidney tubules and pump those back into the bloodstream. They grab them and pump them, grab them and pump them, grab them and pump them. Once you get up over 220 milligrams per deciliter, the transport proteins can't keep up. They're not fast enough. It makes me think about this conveyor belt. All right, you can see this machine grabbing a hold of whatever product it is that it's grabbing and putting it somewhere else. This would be like urine, and this would be like your bloodstream. If this thing speeds up and gets going too fast and there's too much of whatever product that is, this machine is not going to be able to keep up. So some of that stuff is going to leave. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is, once you get up over 220 milligrams per deciliter of sugar in the blood, your kidney transport proteins, they can't keep up. So sugar leaves as urine. Sugar leaves in the urine. And sugar is a solute just like salt is. And what that does is water chases the solute. It's an osmotic balance issue. And this dramatically increases your urinary output. Right? It's all a problem with what we call the transport maximum. When the transport maximum is reached, sugar leaves as urine, and that screws up the osmotic balance of the kidneys and results in a lot of fluid leaving that's not supposed to leave, which in turn makes you very thirsty. It's polydipsia. We talked about these in when we talked about diabetes. Perfect. Filtration breakdown. I invite you to read through this. This is all good information. The concept is that blood enters the glomerulus. That will then be augmented. You have a lot of reabsorption and then some secretion that takes place. That fluid enters the collecting duct. The collecting duct conserves water, and everything there is, from there on out, is just plumbing. Everything's plumbing. This is all controlled by hormones. Certain drugs leave through the same processes. Yeah. Alright, let's see. What do we want to say here? What I've got for you is a nice renal pyramid. This is showing you kind of how the collecting ducts are oriented. They end in these little papillary ducts down here, little pointy parts, papillary ducts. The renal pyramids, and you cut these open, you'll see them. They have a really stringy appearance because it's all just plumbing. Okay, it's a whole bunch of collecting ducts just all coming down together. Like if I go back to the very beginning of this freaking lecture, man. they have a stringy appearance to them. They really have a stringy appearance because it's all just collecting ducts, right? It's a pile of collecting ducts. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Let's talk about the ureter just a little bit. So let's run through. We got a glomerulus. Glomerulus dumps fluid into the kidney tubules of the nephron. The kidney tubules of the nephron dump fluid into the collecting ducts to minor calyces to major calyces to the renal pelvis to the ureter. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Now, the ureter itself can be a maximum of about 5 millimeters in diameter, and it has several layers. An inner mucosal lining. Do I have that on here someplace? I've got to have this on here. Okay, an inner mucosal membrane followed by smooth muscle. All right, smooth muscle, and then a really thick fibrous connective tissue on the outside. What this means is it's got this nice smooth inner lining. It's got muscle built into it, and then it's got a non-expanding ring of connective tissue along the outside. Basically meaning that you can't get more than 5 millimeters of diameter out of a urine. Out of a ureter, I should say. In other words, if you have a kidney stone that's 4 millimeters in diameter, it can probably pass. But if you got one that's 6 or 7 millimeters in diameter, it ain't going through here because it can't stretch the ureter enough to get through. Further, the ureters are muscular. The urine from the kidneys doesn't drain down to the bladder just by gravity. Think about it. Most animals sit with their kidneys and their bladder parallel to one another. They don't have gravity to help them. Think about the animals that hang upside down a lot of the time. Your ureters are muscular because they are capable of peristalsis. They pump urine. Okay, they're peristaltic. They pump urine from the kidneys to the bladder. You can hang upside down by your toes, and your bladder is going to fill with urine over time because the ureters pump that urine into the bladder. And this is why, if you've ever had a kidney stone or know someone that's had a kidney stone, you probably realize that the pain comes in waves. Like they'll hurt, be like, oh, short period of time, and then they'll be like, I don't know, I'm feeling a little better. Then it comes back on. That's because the ureter, its peristaltic waves will start at the top, and they have a wave pushes down. Start at the top, have a wave pushes down. And wherever the stone is, when that peristaltic wave comes through at the stone, it's going to squeeze that kidney stone, and the muscle there is going to grind the very delicate lining of the ureter into the kidney stone, and it tears into it. And that hurts, man. You can feel it. It's painful because you're damaging the ureter. In fact, one of the first things that we do if we think someone has a kidney stone at a hospital is we do a quick urine analysis test. We pull a urine sample and we look at it to see if there's any blood in it. Because if the kidney stone is coming through that ureter, man, it's tearing holes in that ureter. Well, it's tearing up the internal lining of the ureter, I should say, and that's going to make it bleed, okay? So blood in the urine, a real quick diagnostic tool for a kidney stone. Perfect. Perfect. Mucosal lining, smooth muscle, thick fibrous connective tissue along the outside, which basically prevents further expansion. Yeah, that'll work. And let's see, the bladder. So the bladder has 2 sphincters, an internal urethral sphincter and an external urethral sphincter. We've got 2 or 3, let's just say there's a few layers of smooth muscle inside of this that allows the bladder to squeeze and or relax. The inner lining of the bladder is unique. It's got what's called transitional epithelium. Okay, transitional epithelium that line these wrinkles called the rugae. So if your bladder is empty, it's lined with a special form of epithelium called transitional epithelium. These cells are very round, and then they have the ability to be flexible. They flex to be very flat when the bladder stretches. So if the bladder is empty, the cells are very round. If the bladder begins to fill up like a balloon, they get very flat. Basically, this is a highly specialized lining for the bladder itself, so that the bladder can expand and contract, and expand and contract, and expand and contract without damaging the delicate epithelial lining. So this lining is very special in that it can handle the torment of being constantly stretched and relaxed. It's called transitional epithelium. And the inside of the bladder is referred to as having rugae. These are undulations when the bladder is contracted, when it's empty, so that the bladder can then expand and not damage itself. Now, 2 sphincters. There's an internal urethral sphincter that is smooth muscle, and an external urethral sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. And you should know by this point that the smooth muscle will be controlled by your autonomic nervous system, whereas the skeletal muscle is controlled by your conscious mind. Okay, you are aware of and are able to control skeletal muscle, whereas smooth muscle is regulated behind the scenes. And what we're really getting at is how micturition works. That's a fancy way to say how we go to the bathroom. And you've probably seen this happen. Think about a little kid. The little kid's sitting there. You're like, hey, we're about to go somewhere. Do you need to go to the bathroom? Kid says no. You're like, do you need to go because now's the time? Kid says no. Okay, you get them out to the car, you strap them in their car seat good and tight, and they look at you and they say, I gotta go to the bathroom. And you're ready to choke somebody, alright? Let me tell you why this happens. You can be walking around doing whatever it is that you do, and you mystically feel like you need to go to the bathroom. It's not like it just randomly, slowly comes on. No, it's an on-off switch. Having to do with how neural control functions with the bladder. Let me explain. When the bladder fills, it'll get to a certain point where these stretch receptors are inside of here, and they fire off a message to your brain. That message up towards your brain causes an involuntary reflex that automatically opens the internal smooth muscle urethral sphincter. When the bladder gets too full, the body opens the internal urethral sphincter automatically. You have no control of this. This happens by itself. Now, when the internal urethral sphincter opens, this causes you to say, oh, well, I need to go to the bathroom. And you can decide if it's a good time to go or a bad time to go because you have control over the external urethral sphincter, which is smooth muscle. Little kids walking around doing what they do, and then suddenly it just hits them like, I gotta go to the bathroom. Because that internal urethral sphincter opened and that urine ran out and hit their external urethral sphincter, and boy, they're working to keep that thing closed. Little kids growing, this is how this works. Why does the kid feel like they have to go to the bathroom when you strap them into the car seat? Because that puts more pressure against the abdomen, which stretches these receptors even further, which opens that internal urethral sphincter. That's how all this works together. There's an involuntary aspect and a voluntary aspect. The voluntary aspect is somatic motor control. You're able to consciously control this. The involuntary aspect is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, regulating the internal urethral sphincter. Perfect. Perfect. Smooth muscle, skeletal muscle. You need to know that. Alright, renal failure and hemodialysis. We can talk a little bit about this, I suppose. So, the kidneys are actually super tough, man. Boy, they're tough. But you can damage them. Most of the time when I see kidney damage, it's due to heavy metal toxicity. Or you can end up with what's called rhabdomyolysis. This is a problem when you have muscle damage, and the muscles have internal components that get into the bloodstream and just tear the kidneys right on up. High blood pressure can damage the kidneys. Chronic kidney infections like a bad car wreck. Any of this can lead to damage to the nephrons, damage to the kidneys themselves. Now, the nephrons are real tough. They can restore themselves, and kidney function can come back on pretty quick after injuries. In fact, you probably realize that you can lose a kidney and be totally fine. The other kidney will take on the load. In fact, you can survive with only about a third of a single kidney, as long as your urine output is maintained. But if your urine output drops too much, you end up with major problems. Buildup of nitrics, the nitrogenous waste products, azotemia, acidosis, uremia. You can even turn anemic if the kidneys aren't working because they're not releasing erythropoietin to stimulate for red blood cell formation. And in this case, what we have to do is called hemodialysis, okay, or just dialysis for short. Dialysis is a procedure where a person goes in and blood is pumped out of their body into a machine. The machine processes the blood, pulls out excess water, pulls out nitrogenous waste products, pulls out anything that the body doesn't need, and then dumps it right back into the body. Okay, so in essence, the machine does the job of the kidney and then pumps it right back into the body. This is not an easy process, especially if you don't like big needles, because they use big needles here. Think about sitting in a chair several times a week for 6 or 8 hours. That's a big time commitment. And it's not a fun thing either. You're sitting there with needles in your arm listening to a machine. Yeah, man, that's dialysis. That's dialysis. Now, there are variations of this. I invite you to look at CAPD, but I'm not going to get into that at this stage. All right, kidney stones. I've sort of already talked about. Kidney stones are formed from minerals, typically in the urine, and they tend to leave via the urine stream. It's rare for them to get too big. Once they form, they tend to leave. That's why you're not really aware of them in most cases. But once they get up to a millimeter or 2, maybe 3, they'll hurt on the way out. You can pass them. It's not that big of a deal in reality, but it hurts real bad, okay? As those peristaltic waves pass through, boy, it feels like you're going to puke everywhere. Your back feels like it's going to explode. Blood in the urine. Yeah, man. So generally the pain from a kidney stone is in the ureter. So as the ureter is pushing that stone down, it hurts really bad. Once the stone gets into the bladder, you don't notice it anymore. A friend of mine, my brother, it's all good. My brother was talking about, he's like, yeah, you know, kidney stones go down. It's like, it hurts terrible. And then it felt like it was just gone. And then a day goes by, and I'm going to the bathroom, and suddenly my urine stream stops. And then out pops a kidney stone. That's exactly the way it seems to you. That's how this works. Now, risk factors are pretty obvious. Dehydration. If you're not drinking enough fluid, that's a real risk factor for kidney stones. If you have a really high animal protein intake, lots of salt, refined sugars, if you're drinking fruit juice all the time, especially for whatever reason, grapefruit juice and apple J, man, it dramatically increases your risk of kidney stones. Let me tell you, like a person I know whom is a urologist told me. He said, when you go to the bathroom, when you go to the bathroom, you want your urine to be clear, man. If you're not on like really good, what do you call them, vitamins and stuff that make your urine turn crazy colors. If you're just a normal person going about your day, you want your urine clear. And if your urine is not clear every time you go to the bathroom, if it looks like Kool-Aid or something, man, let me tell you, you need to be drinking more urine or you're going to have kidney stones. If you're drinking Cokes all the freaking time, you're going to have kidney stones. You got to be careful, okay? You need to really drink lots of water in a day, and that's going to reduce your risk of having this terrible, terrible thing happen to you. Some of these stones can be real big, and if you look at this, it's just covered in spikes. They're just covered in, because they're crystals. These are crystalline, and it's not a fun experience by any stretch. This last but not least, yeah, urine analysis. So we can learn a lot from the urine. All right, this is a very obvious one. You can see bacteria in here with the urine. You can see red blood cells in here with the urine. This is a major problem. Urine analysis tells us a lot about the body. Pretty easy to do. It's a real quick process. Let's see, what do I want to say? Diagnose kidney diseases, carbohydrate metabolism disorders. Real easy to diagnose diabetes by looking for sugar in the urine. Liver diseases, urinary tract infections. I mean, how do we test for pregnancy? We use the urine. How do we test for drugs? We use the urine. We can even diagnose what's called compartment syndrome in the musculature by using the urine, by looking for a chemical called myoglobin. So urinalysis is a wonderful tool for testing a person to see if they have problems. Yes, perfect. And this last but not least slide here breaks down how the urinary system interacts with the other systems of your body. That is to say that the urinary system plays a very important role with all of your other functioning systems. Okay, so that's good enough for this. You can expect a quiz on this pretty soon. And, yeah, have a nice day. Thanks, guys.